The following news flash is brought to you by the Lone Star Lowdown, providing your daily bulletins for the commodities market. Today in history, news updates, and the inside scoop into the tides of the alternative. Markets for Wednesday, March 9th, 2016 are currently trading with gold at $1,252.65 an ounce, silver $15.29 an ounce, Texas crude $36.50 a barrel, and Bitcoin is currently sitting at about 411 U.S. currency. Today in history, the year 1961, the first animal safely returned from space after completing one full orbit around the Earth in Sputnik 9. A doggy named Chernushka, or Blackie, returned from the heavens. Today in history. In recent news, Tayrod Pugh, a U.S. Air Force veteran, was found guilty today of attempting to join the Islamic State. After a week-long trial at a Brooklyn federal court, a jury found Tayrod guilty of attempting to provide material support to ISIS and guilty of obstruction for destroying 4 e-storage drives after his detention in Turkey. Pugh is set to be sentenced in September. Pugh's defense lawyer is arguing that all he did was express repugnant views about the Islamic State on Facebook and watch dozens of the group's recruitment videos, and that he was only traveling to Turkey to find work, not to become a jihadist. However, prosecutors are presenting a letter he apparently drafted to his Egyptian wife, which was found on his laptop, in which he vowed to fight for Islam. When detained in Istanbul, he apparently had a black face mask, a map depicting Islamic State's stronghold in Syria, and a chart of the border crossings between Turkey and Syria. Pugh served as an avionics specialist in the Air Force from 1986 to 1990, and later worked as an army contractor in Iraq from 2009 to 2010. Toyota recently showed off a new device that could dramatically assist the visually impaired to better navigate their surroundings. Called Project Blade, an informational device to bridge the gap between a cane or a guide dog. Toyota has been testing various prototypes of the wearable device with individuals from the visually impaired community for the past 3 years, and though the details of the project were released this week, no official timeline has been set for the release. The automaker plans incorporating mapping, object identification, and facial mapping technologies into Blade in the future. Doug Moore, manager of Partner Robotics at Toyota, told ABC that Toyota is thinking about quality of life for individuals and how to impact society. The Lone Star Lowdown is currently looking to fill some ad space. If you have a product or service you'd like to advertise with us, feel free to give me a call at 210-363-2257. This is Rick Rohde with your Lowdown for March 9th, 2016.
It's 11:59 at Radio Free America, and this is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall. John has a long mustache. John has a long mustache. It's 12 o'clock, Americans, another day closer to victory. And for all of you out there on or behind the lines, this is your song.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. I have a joke for you.
Okay.
The government in this town is excellent and uses your tax dollars efficiently.
Faillici kan de man till
Bitcoin is immune from attack almost completely. But Bitcoin, you actually gain far more from using the computing power to generate Bitcoin.
There's a system approaching perfection. It's in time for it to disappear. There's a system approaching perfection. It's in time for it to disappear.
We'll walk deeper into the belly of the beast. If it means I'm able to further limit reckless government spending. I mean, I have so many ideas. Some are simple, like take down traffic lights and eliminate the post office. The bigger ones will be tougher, like bring all of this crumbling to the ground.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is The Crypto Show, a show dedicated to understanding the promise of currency, technology, and liberty in the pursuit of a free society. And if you believe like we do that such a society can and should exist, then join us, why don't you, as we parade through a world unbound by convention, a world sketched by the beauty of the human artist, because each and every one of you listening right now is that artist. So for the next 2 hours, let go of your most sacred system of thought and entertain the possibility that maybe, just maybe, everything we've been told about currency, technology, and yes, even that dirty little word anarchy is only one part of an ever-expanding, ever-possible, complex universe of ideas, one that we simply refuse to explore. So what do you say, listeners? Let's do some universe exploring tonight and have some fun while we do it. At some point, I'm going to watch the new series. You've been watching some of it, right, Denny?
Yeah, it's been all right.
Just all right?
Yeah, just all right.
And I guess that's the fate or curse of sequels.
Kind of like that intro you've been reading for way too long.
I knew you were thinking that. I really did. Literally, I was watching your face.
It's just a mystery as why we keep reading that.
Well, part of it is I think Harlan, the founder of the show, wrote that.
Okay.
And it's sort of a tribute to him. And I hope he'll come back on the show in the coming, sometime in the coming year. We saw him recently, and he's doing quite well. He's a busy man, though, and I think he's trying to focus on other aspects of his life for a while before returning to the world of crypto and libertarianism and all the other, crazier stuff that we sometimes get into. But no, literally, I was watching your face and thinking he is upset that I'm still reading the same thing, and he is thinking what a slacker his co-host is, which I am. I admit, I am also pretty busy though. So to my credit, it's not like I just do nothing, but I do need to focus more on little parts of the show like that, like getting a new intro. And I should get one because I need to make it more personalized. And honestly, like I think if I made it more personalized, I would, frankly, read it better. Like not that I read it crappily or something, but I think it would come out more natural and more heartfelt if I did. So anyway, we'll work on that. Well, today is Sunday, March 13th, 2016. And we have Holland Van Nieuwenhof in studio. Just coming to say hi, though. Maybe he'll drop in the second hour. Or he can drop in now, either way. But we also are going to have a guest coming on here in a second, whom I will introduce. He is a repeat guest, an excellent guest. We had such a great time with him last time. Not just informationally and educationally, but it was quite a bit of fun. And we were hoping to have Lynn Ulbricht in studio, but unfortunately she had to cancel last minute. We will probably have her on again. We had her on recently to discuss.
She just hasn't shown up yet. She might.
She may still show up. There you go. Well, I'm going to pretend like it's a full-fledged cancellation. That way, when she does show up, you guys are going to be so excited and so thrilled. You're just going to wet your pants. But anyway. We hope we'll talk to her again soon. Don't forget, the last time she was on, she was announcing a new fundraiser thing for the freeross.org campaign. So go to freeross.org, and basically it's a picture that Ross drew called The Trial I Saw. And of course, it's a depiction of his own trial from his perspective. And you can pay $1 per pixel to reveal that picture, which is digitally covered. And I think that's a really neat idea. So check that out, see how much is revealed, and see what you can reveal while helping out, Ross Ulbricht, an important man to help out. Well, on the line, let's not wait any longer. We've got Ladar Levison, repeat guest here on the Crypto Show. And for those who don't know, Ladar was the founder of LavaBit, which was a privacy-focused email system that Ed Snowden actually coincidentally was using at the time.
A lot of other people used it too.
As well as a lot of other people. But who cares about those people? Ed Snowden was. And unfortunately,
that's what he's commonly known for is Snowden's email provider. Rather than being a good service, it's just known as Snowden's.
I know. Provider. Well, you got a lowest common denominator. That's what I say with our listeners now. But no, it was an incredible service, very successful until Ladar basically went galt in response to what the government wanted from him, and we'll have him recount that. He's recounted that in the show before, but in case you're new, and I'm sure we do have people who may not have heard his previous appearances. We're going to have him tell us just a little bit about that. He's also the founder of Darkmail, sort of a subsequent attempt at something similar. And we'll talk to him about that and his progress with it. Ladar, welcome back to the Crypto Show.
Thank you for having me. I must say flattery will get you nowhere. I'm quite immune. But again, thank you for bringing me back. And I'm really excited to be talking about the Apple case out in California today.
Yeah. Yes, and like I would even mention that, but I wanted Ladar to mention it for our listeners. I'm really excited too. This is a really incredible and historic thing that's going on, and I'm not surprised that you're involved in it, of all people. So that's really exciting. So we'll get to that, but let's leave our listeners a little bit in suspense while we give them some background for you. And to give them background for you, we, in a sense, give background for what's going on currently with this Apple case. So. Go ahead, Ladar, and you can be brief about it, but tell us about LavaBit and what happened there, and we'll kind of segue into Apple.
All right. Well, I guess the 2-minute version of the story is I was running an encrypted email service. I had about 410,000 users. The system offered a unique encryption feature which protected messages at rest using a user's password. It was a combination of symmetric and asymmetric cryptography. And along came the government about 10 years into operating the service, and they were absolutely determined to view the plain text contents of one of my users. And as a result, we ended up in a abbreviated court battle, which took place in secret up in Virginia, in which they first demanded that I decrypt the data, seeing as how I was mathematically unable to do that. There was a fork in the road, and it's an important fork because it differentiates my case from the Apple case going on right now. But they demanded the TLS key directly so that they could set up what's classically known as a man-in-the-middle attack and intercept the password and use that in combination with the source code to decrypt the content stored on disk. And after, like I said, an abbreviated court battle, I was forced to turn over the key, and in response to being forced to allow them to intercept and inspect the contents of every user's communications and not be able to tell anybody what was going on, nor change the set of circumstances that led to that situation, I decided to suspend that operation, suspend the operation of the email service. And in the intervening approximately 3 years, I've obtained somewhat of a crash course in all of the various laws that are involved in electronic surveillance and compulsory third-party writs of assistance. And the Apple case that has come up very recently has sort of become the next big fight in this particular battle. It's not the only fight, I should emphasize that. It just happens to be the next case that has become public, with mine being the first.
Right. Yeah, they're very similar. I mean, really. Do you think that they're using the Apple case more or less for just a broad backdoor to get into everybody's phone? And do you also think that that may have been what they were looking to do with Snowden, kind of using Snowden as an excuse to get into the rest of the LavaBit?
I'm not going to pretend to know what the Department of Justice is thinking, but I will say that you probably shouldn't believe what they say publicly. Obviously, if they win the fight out in California, it'll be a dangerous precedent, a precedent that they will more than certainly use to break into phones in the future using similar methods, and break into phones that are probably using far more protections than the phone at the center of this particular case. One thing that I should probably start with is just differentiating the set of facts in the two cases. The reason they're the same is they both involve a situation where data is stored on a disk. In my case, it was on our storage servers where it was encrypted. In the iPhone case, it's on the SSD inside of the iPhone. In both cases, the data is encrypted with a secret piece of information that only the user knows. In the case of the iPhone, it's a 4 to 6 digit PIN code. And in the case of the LavaBit server, it was a user's password. So that presents a sort of fundamental distinction, because in the iPhone case, they can brute force the 4 to 6 digit PIN code, whereas in my case, they could not brute force the user's password, because they just presumed, probably correctly, that based on the subject's background and skill set, that he would probably have chosen a sufficiently complex password to alleviate that method of attack. In the case in California, we're dealing with an order under the All Writs Act, and in my case, they sought the key based on the technical assistance provision in the Pen Register Track and Trace statute, and via a search warrant under the Stored Communications Act.
Interesting. Well, we're coming to break with Ladar Levison, founder of LavaBit. And if you were just tuning in, he just gave us a rundown of the LavaBit service and why he had to shut it down because of the government's attempt to intrude on the encrypted information, and then comparing it to the current Apple case. And we'll talk more with him on the other side about this Apple case. It's really, a fascinating thing. And to me, they're all important cases in the fight for civil rights and for privacy. But we'll be right back with Ladar Levison here on The Crypto Show. Stay tuned.
You are listening to the Logos Radio Network. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
This is what happens when you call the cops. Say what? This is what happens when you call the cops. Come on. This is what happens when you call the cops. You get your rights violated or you all get shot. This is what happens when you call the cops. This is what happens when you call the cops. This is what happens.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Crypto Show here on this lovely March 13th, 2016. Here on Logos Radio Network, whose fundraiser, I believe, is going through next month. So go to logosradionetwork.com and help out to keep this wonderful programming alive. And go to go to thecryptoshow.com/free Ross to bid on or purchase some cool stuff, the proceeds of which go to the Ross Ulbricht Appeals Fund. And you go to freeross.org to unveil Ross's drawing of his trial. The Trial I Saw is the title, and all the proceeds of that go to his appeals fund as well. Don't forget our sponsors, Brave New Books and Hill Country Home Improvements. And we're speaking with Ladar Levison, founder of LavaBit, also founder of Darkmail, and we'll talk to him about Darkmail later on in the show after we flesh out this Apple case. But there is a legal case with Apple going on right now that Ladar is a part of. And actually, before we kind of dig more into that, I want him to explain in just a moment just what that part he is playing is. But it is a somewhat similar case to his LavaBit scenario, and even in the ways in which it differs. What's important about additional similarity is that it's all about privacy and rights. And I was just looking at Ladar's Twitter page, actually, and I think it's King Ladar, Ladar.
That's right. I'm the king of all the Ladars.
In my heart, I think you are. That's an interesting picture of you, by the way. I think it's Ladar's dog, but cute dog. But it's funny because let me see, what was I just looking at? He cites a passage, I think, from the brief, and it's the risk that a recipient will share an email equates to an expectation of surveillance. And then further down, he talks about, according to a judge, national security outweighs the privacy interests of U.S. persons. And what's funny about that is they are doing their best to stretch the existing laws to get through the rights violations that they want. I mean, I guess at least they're still constricted and confined by existing law to where they have to do all sorts of contortions to get around it, but it's pretty ridiculous. And then I also find it ironic that violating our privacy is in the interest of our national security. If you think about that, our lack of privacy undermines our national security because the nation is composed of individuals whose privacy is a part of their security. But anyway, we can have Ladar comments on that. But I do want to first start off with Ladar, something that struck me about what you said before we went to break, and we did discuss this off air, but for our listeners, with your service, a brute force attack would have been basically impossible, given the alphanumeric string of characters required and the sophistication of users. Their password would not likely be something simple and easy to break. But with the 4 to 6 digit PIN on the Apple, that seems like a pretty easy brute force attack. Why is it that the government is resorting to this rather than just hacking away at it with brute force?
That's a good question. I'll just quickly throw in on what you were talking about on my Twitter feed. Those extracts are actually from a recent federal court ruling that legitimized the Section 702 bulk surveillance program mandated by the FISC, effectively what we sometimes call PRISM. So that's why it's especially scary. But back to Apple. In this particular case, the real question is, well, why can't the government extract the SSD from the device, hook it up to a breadboard, and then brute force the 4 to 6 PIN code directly? And the reason is the 4 to 6 digits aren't the only piece of information used to encrypt the data. Starting with iOS 8, what they did is they took an internal unique identifier that's generated at the time of manufacture and is unknown to Apple, and they combined that long stream of randomly generated information with the 4 to 6 digits. And because that UID is embedded in this case, it's an iPhone 5C with an A6 processor, because that UID is buried deep within that processor and they're unable to extract it, they have to go through the device's operating system in order to get access to the data. And again, starting with iOS 8, Apple added a feature that you can enable or disable, which, if enabled, means that if you enter the PIN code incorrectly 10 times, it will wipe the device. And what it basically does, as I understand it, is it resets that internal UID, wiping the AES key that is used to access the SSD, and the data is presumably gone forever.
Wow. So even if they attempted brute force, I guess manually, it's going to wipe it clean and generate a new internal code, which means they'll just have to start all over again.
That's correct. The last time this particular phone was backed up to the iCloud was, I believe, October 19th or 16th, about a month and a half before the shooting. And based on that backup, the FBI believes that that setting has been enabled.
Okay, and so when you said that this internal code was put there during manufacture and is unknown to Apple, how does that work, and how can we be sure of that?
I guess you just have to take Apple on their word. And I don't think there's any particular reason to doubt them. Most processors have internal unique identifiers that aren't necessarily, you're not necessarily able to extract through any sort of publicly defined API or system. And in this case, Apple is combining that internal piece of secret information with the random information that the user provides to generate the AES key. Now, there may be a third component. The briefs weren't exactly clear on how this particular process works. So I don't know if the UID is actually being reset if you enter it incorrectly 10 times, or if there's a third piece of information that is also stored internally. But the bottom line is the AES key that is used to store all of the data on the SSD is only accessible within the confines of that A6 processor running the version of iOS that happened to be on the phone at the time. In this case, it was iOS 9. And it is configured such that if it receives 10 incorrect entries, it will wipe its internal AES key used to store that data.
And what is the government's justification for needing to break into the Apple phone like this? Was there a particular incident or case that they built this on, or tell us about that?
So this entire case stems from the San Bernardino mass shooting in which 14 people were killed. It was a husband and wife combo, the Farouks, who were employees of San Bernardino County and went to their place of work and started shooting their employees. And the reason that it's considered a terrorism case is because right before they went on this particular rampage, they posted a Pledge of Allegiance to ISIS on their Facebook page. So it's a terrorism investigation, and amongst the questions that they want answered and what they think may be contained within the confines of this particular iPhone are, was there a third shooter? If everyone remembers when this story first broke, originally we thought there were 3 shooters instead of 2. They also want to know if anyone provided assistance to these particular individuals, knowledge, resources, access to weapons. There was a period of time, I forget the exact length of it, but it was a couple of hours between when the shooting occurred and when the FBI was able to catch up with them. They're curious where the individuals were and what they were doing during that time. So they think all of that information might be contained on that phone. So they do have a valid and legitimate interest to investigate the contents of it. I guess it's also probably worth noting that in this particular case, the iPhone actually belongs to San Bernardino County and was issued as part of his daily duties. So there isn't necessarily a Fourth Amendment right to privacy involved here. It's just purely one of technical considerations.
So, saying that, if they win this case against Apple, would it be let's talk about this on the other side since we're coming to break. But basically, I'm curious, if the government wins this case, what will be the implications for what it's allowed to do with Apple iPhones? And will it be restricted to certain cases like this, terrorism related, that's already occurred or occurring, and only if it lacks Fourth Amendment protection? Or is it going to be more sort of carte blanche allowance for the government? But we'll find out more about that with Ladar Levison, and we'll also find out his specific involvement that we've only really touched upon on the other side. And we might also have a special guest in studio. I don't know. You'll have to wait and find out for that on the other side of the break. So this is The Crypto Show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Could your pharmacy release your prescription information to marketers? Believe it or not, it's not only possible, it's probably been done. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and I'll be back with loopholes that make it legal for companies like CVS to share your personal health information.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This public service announcement is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Your pharmacy may be sharing your medical information without your knowledge or consent. For example, CVS pharmacies are likely to disclose your personal health information to business associates. A loophole in the law allows it if parties agree to execute a contract to, quote, safeguard the data. Business associates could range from marketers to insurance companies, and while they might keep information locked up, there's no telling how it might come back to bite you. Ask your pharmacy to disclose how it shared your previous data, and request in writing that it not be sold, rented, or shared. And most importantly, take your future prescriptions to establishments that guarantee real privacy. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht. More news and information at CatherineAlbrecht.com.
You are listening to the Logos Radio Network. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader or will you follow? Are you a fighter or will you cower? It's our time to take back the power. What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader or will you follow? Are you a fighter or will you cower? It's our time to take back the power. What you gonna do when they show up in black suits on your street in army boots and they'll silence you? What you gonna say when they strip your rights away and the tax man makes you pay for every bit of sweat you got today? We don't need to run and hide. We won't be pushed off to the side. What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader or will you follow? Are you a fighter or will you cower? It's our time. Take back the power. What's your plan?
And welcome back, guys, to the Crypto Show here on this lovely Sunday, March 13th, 2016. Here on Logos Radio Network, brought to you as always by Brave New Books and Hill Country Home Improvements. And don't forget, thecryptoshow.com/free Ross has some cool stuff to bid on or purchase, all of the proceeds of which go to the Ross Ulbricht Appeals Fund. And we have a special guest in studio. We're going to get to that person momentarily, but I do want to kind of temporarily wrap up the thought I had before the break that I wanted to discuss with Ladar. Now, I do want to just quickly comment even before that I find it interesting. I was unaware that this case was based on the San Bernardino shooting, which, of course, terrorism is always an excuse for these types of cases.
Where have you been?
Huh?
Where have you been? Everybody knew that.
Oh, well, I'm behind. See, I keep myself purposely in the dark a little bit to make the show more interesting and to allow the guests to draw it out more. I mean, because
people are like baffled. Why does Chris not know this?
I know. Well, it's just, it's the holes in my brain. But, you know, of course, the government uses terrorism as an excuse for everything, to take away our rights and grab control. Now, of course, I personally think there are a lot of dubious aspects to this terrorism case, not least of which, as was alluded to, you know, the Arab Muslim couple was originally identified as three tall, muscular white men. And, you know, also considering the fact that this facility had monthly police drills and that there was a police drill going on just up the block. And of course, then the reporters were allowed into their apartment unrestrained to tamper with evidence and to look at everything. Really bizarre case. Regardless of all that, it is interesting how
it looked like a reality TV show.
It did. It was so weird. But regardless of all that and what that might imply, you know, this is just being used as another excuse for the government to do these things.
So I'm back, guys. Did you want me to finish answering that question, or did you steal my thunder already?
No. So I was just leading into that. Sorry, I'm a little long-winded, but go ahead, Ladar.
Yeah, I used the B word, and all of a sudden the call gets dropped. So maybe I need to stay away from that word, or the FCC will be on us. So the reason this Apple case has become public isn't necessarily an accident. The DOJ picked this particular case on purpose because the optics of it are very good. They can claim with a straight face that they're not trying to, quote, break encryption. They're just trying to unlock an iPhone, something that they've asked Apple to do for many years in the past, and in which Apple has never fought them, at least until October of last year. The case involves terrorism. It involves a situation where the phone is actually owned by a government entity, in this case, San Bernardino County, so there's no Fourth Amendment issue. And, of course, the shooter is dead, so there isn't necessarily a compelling interest to keep the case secret. Now, you asked, what is Apple actually being forced to do that is so important in this case? And it really comes down to two things. Because of the way the system is designed, what Apple needs to do in order to circumvent its own security mechanisms is write what I would term a malicious update to the iOS operating system, test it, QA it, and then use the sign key that is stored inside their hardware security module at their facility to sign this malicious update so that it can be loaded onto the iPhone in question. And what the government wants from this malicious update is two things: to disable the auto-delete function so that they can enter the passcode as many times as they want, and to allow the passcode to be entered programmatically via the Lightning cable, so that they can basically set up a computer to brute force it instead of having to sit there and punch in the digits manually. That, in terms of optics, looks good because, like I said, they can say with a straight face that they're not necessarily trying to break encryption. And, of course, we all know the emotions that get evoked when you use the word terrorism. I mean, you have to remember that this case is taking place in the Central District of California, which is right outside Los Angeles, very close to where the shootings happened, you can believe that the magistrate judge, is familiar with those circumstances, had to live through that scenario. Those emotions are all going to be coming into play. So it's not an accident. But what's dangerous about this precedent is that it basically means you would never be able to trust your iPhone or any other commercially available smartphone to protect your information in the future. Because at any time, the manufacturer of that particular device could be forced to create a malicious operating system update that disables some of the security mechanisms that are used to protect your data and push that malicious update out to the device, potentially even while it's still in your possession. And once they can compromise the operating system, they can compromise every mechanism that we know of as engineers that we would use to protect information. So they can steal if, for example, somebody had set up a strong password to protect the encryption on their device, that could be stolen. Those credentials could be stolen. All of these secure end-to-end communication apps that have sprung up the last few years, particularly WhatsApp, Snapchat, Redphone, TextSecure, Signal, Telegram, all of them would overnight become untrustworthy because that phone could be running a malicious update, which is secretly taking the plain text and sending it out to the FBI or the NSA if it was overseas, or it could be stealing the key directly so that the attacker could simply pick up the encrypted data off of the network. That's
go ahead.
That's the danger, right?
No, and obviously a huge danger, and I wasn't aware until you said it that those encrypted services like Signal and Telegram would also be compromised. And that's big too, because a lot of people take it for granted that, at least right now, if they're using those services, regardless of any other potential system compromise on their phone or anything that the government tries to do, people feel secure in using those. But you're saying that if the government wins this case, that may not be the case at all in the future.
Yeah, so in order to speak or communicate securely, you need three things. You need to be able to trust the hardware that you're running on, not to have some vulnerability or side channel attack. You need to trust the operating system, which coordinates and allocates resources, and in this case, what the FBI is trying to compromise. And then you also need to be able to trust the app itself. Now, presumably, you could have a malicious app on the device, and the operating system would be responsible for keeping those different apps isolated from each other. So there are other methods of sort of breaking Signal or Telegram or any of these other, secure communication apps. But by being able to break the operating system, it effectively becomes a skeleton key that could be used against any form of encrypted communications that we know of.
Now, we're coming to break in a little over a minute, so we're going to get to our special guest on the other side of the break. It's a better transition that way. But in the minute remaining...
I was just calling you a big tease.
What?
A big tease.
A big tease.
I'm a big tease. That's what I do. You're not the first man to call me a big tease, Ladar. Denny does frequently as well, but he's not the only one. No. Why did Apple, by the way, we got 50 seconds. Why did Apple initially or previously resist the government's attempts previously not resist and then now they're resisting?
It all comes down to the All Writs Act and encryption and sort of the changing attitudes in Silicon Valley, which I'm sure we can talk about after the break.
That sounds excellent. I'm excited. After the break, though, we're going to take a quick break and switch gears and speak with our special guest whose involvement here is not unrelated to the topic at hand or our other guest, Ladar Levison. So it's going to be really interesting.
We're going to bring up the footnote?
We'll bring that up as well and a whole bunch of other stuff on the other side. So stay tuned here on The Crypto Show with Ladar Levison.
All easy.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Big Tease. The Crypto Show here on Logos Radio Network. And this is Sunday, March 13th, 2016. And I call it the Big Tease because we're actually going to hold off one more segment. with our special guest in studio. And everyone was like, Chris, don't do it. Don't do it. Bring this person on. But I was like, no, this makes for better radio when we hold off even more, when we basically lie to our listeners and then we say, nope, sorry, you got to wait further. And,
as if they couldn't read social media. I've only been posting it for 2 days.
I thought I was the king of foreplay, but no, I don't find that.
Oh, Ladar. Well, that's a whole other episode. If you want to come on and talk about that. No, I'm just kidding. But like King Ladar, I like this. But anyway, yeah, that is Ladar Levison, king of foreplay, or just King Ladar on his Twitter. And this is the big tease. Okay, switching gears. But we are talking about more.
About the attitude change and why all of a sudden Apple started fighting these particular orders.
Exactly, because go ahead.
So what I was going to say is that there's something that everybody needs to keep in the back of their minds, that there's a lot of stuff going on that we don't know about, both in federal district courts, a little bit in state courts, and of course in the FISC, or the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which sort of acts independently of the federal judiciary system. This case is somewhat significant because it's been made public. It could almost be seen as a proxy fight. But what it all comes down to is the Snowden revelations 3 years ago, back in 2013, began a gradual tidal wave of pushback against government surveillance. From where I sit, I see the evolution of today's case as being a direct result of the abuses that took place in what I would call the golden age of electronic surveillance or signals intelligence, which stretched from roughly 2001 until roughly 2013. And it represents a concerted effort by engineers like myself to build better security mechanisms into products and services. The particular set of features or sort of the way this encryption system works on the iPhone was developed as a result of Apple's reaction to, amongst other things, the very famous slide that was released, which showed that they were intercepting data between Apple, amongst all the other service providers' data centers as it went back and forth because it wasn't going over a VPN, thereby circumventing the legal process. Coupled with their penchant of using all sorts of legal and extra-legal means to extract data. And of course, that stems from the very root of the problem here, which is that the federal government, law enforcement in the intelligence community, have this deep-rooted belief that they're entitled to access everybody's communications, regardless of the security mechanisms in place. So it sort of developed as a conflict. And I can relate it just briefly to a lot of it. The encryption system that became the heart of my case in 2013 was actually developed in 2004 when the very first stories about national security letters broke. National security letters being the administrative classified mechanism for obtaining subscriber information from service providers via this classified letter. And, that story broke in 2004. At the time, we didn't know who the plaintiff was. We later learned that it was Nick Merrill and Calex. But I basically built my system to avoid being put in the very situation that I faced in 2013. And of course, it worked for 10 years, and then technology evolved and the law evolved, and nobody told us because, like I said, everything took place in secret. Now, what we do know is that it appears starting in October, Apple began objecting to orders of assistance, which had been issued under what is colloquially called the All Writs Act, which was originally passed in 1789. The All Writs Act is basically a blank check. And what it was intended to do in 1789 was give the courts the authority to compel assistance from third parties in areas in which there hadn't been a particular statute passed. The fact that there is no law compelling Apple to provide this assistance could be considered by some legal scholars as being a gap. It hasn't been explicitly prohibited by Congress, but it hasn't been explicitly mandated by Congress either. The All Writs Act was amended, I believe, in the 70s, but the amendments weren't necessarily relevant in this particular case. But basically, like I said, it's a blank check. Now, there are two All Writs Act cases that we're following involving Apple. There's one in the Eastern District of New York, which I believe involves an iPhone 5S running iOS 7, which Apple is fighting. Now, that case is different from the California case because it's running iOS 7. Apple doesn't necessarily have to write and cryptographically sign malicious software in order to break into that phone, but is still objecting to that particular order based on the grounds that it was issued under the All Writs Act. This same act is being applied to the case in the Central District of California, trying to compel them to provide the manner of assistance that I described before the last break.
Okay, so, and of course, the California case is the current case that we're discussing, obviously. Based on San Bernardino.
Everybody is following the EDNY case because it does involve the All Writs Act and whether or not service providers can be compelled to provide arbitrary assistance under that act. But the San Bernardino case is far more significant because not only does it involve the use of the All Writs Act, but it involves using it to compel the creation of a new piece of software and the use of an encryption key.
And if the government wins this case, and maybe this is like an obvious question, you talked about their ability to just compromise phones, whenever they want. Is that something they could do also secretly, or would it have to be, publicly admitted? Or
well, we would know the precedent from this case, and therefore we would know that. I mean, we kind of already know that is a possibility. And is probably happening. But this case will set a precedent going forward one way or the other. Regardless of what's happened in secret, if Apple loses, then it'll be far easier for the government to compel this kind of what I call extraordinary assistance in the future, versus if Apple wins, it could be far harder for the government to compel extraordinary assistance in the future. And what you have to remember is that we're dealing with an operating system update here, but this particular precedent could be applied to creators of encrypted communication apps. You could force a malicious version of, Redphone to be pushed out that doesn't generate its particular keys as securely as it should. And those updates could be pushed out to particular users that have been targeted for surveillance. So it opens some very dangerous doors.
Oh, wow. So, yeah. So it could be more than a... Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, everybody thinks about the obvious example of, Google's Android and the various companies that manufacture and sell Android devices. But then there's also Microsoft, which could be forced to push out malicious updates to its various Windows customers. Same goes for Apple being forced to push out malicious updates to its Mac OS customers. And then, of course, you have to start thinking about all of the free Linux distros. Could this precedent be used to compel the maintainers of a particular distro, Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu, etc., to create a malicious update and push that out to a targeted operating system? It really comes down to what I would call extraordinary assistance, which I defined as the use, modification, or seizure of intellectual property, such as source code or keys, in order to facilitate surveillance. Can the government do that, or can't they? And it really comes down to your own personal beliefs about what our rights are and what our personal liberties are. Now, I'm guessing your audience is probably a little bit biased. I'm probably speaking to a home crowd. Obviously, if you talk to law enforcement, they have a very different view. But this issue isn't necessarily settled. There was a recent Gardner poll which said that 50% of Americans who were aware of what's going on with Apple believed that they should help out the FBI. Something like 35 or 40% were the other way around, thought that Apple was right in this particular request, and then a small percentage were undecided. But what I found particularly interesting is a subsequent poll that came out about a week ago, which found something like 3-1 in favor of Apple amongst people who were independent voters. And it just goes to show you that, if you dig beyond the headlines to really understand what's going on, this becomes a far more serious issue than it was when it was first presented on the surface.
For sure. And we're coming to break with Ladar Levison.
We don't need to talk about how the FBI could break into this phone without requiring Apple's assistance.
Yes, we definitely need to get into that. So on the other side, though, we might take a quick break and speak with our special guest. I'm really saddened by that poll. Yes, 3-1 were against the Apple sharing with the FBI, but amongst independent voters, but that's a small percentage of the actual electorate. And of course, because they're independent, they're going to be a little more free-thinking. But that isn't the majority of people. And it's sad that the majority of the people, even if it was initially in the beginning of the case, and maybe it's changed, would basically side with the FBI.
None of those people had Obama phone or Trump phone.
Well, that's the problem. That's why. Well, we'll be right back.
I think it's a question of ethics.
Can't be trusted. Can't be trusted. Can't be trusted. I don't trust no one. Run of my middle, there's a loaded gun. Can't trust it. The CIA. Can't trust it.
guys, welcome back to the second hour of the Crypto Show here on this lovely March 13th, 2016, a Sunday, here on Logos Radio Network, brought to you as always by Brave New Books and Hill Country Home Improvements. And I'm about to announce our special guest who's with us in studio. Of course, if you've been listening, we've been hearing us talk with our other guest on the line, Ladar Levison, creator of LavaBit and Darkmail, and currently connected to an Apple case involving the government that we've been discussing. Now, we're going to switch gears momentarily and speak with our...
He's like the little honey badger they should have never messed with.
I know, right? And, this case really is so important. Lynn was saying off air, it's about the precedent that it sets. And, I was going to ask Ladar a question that he basically answered without me asking, which is, is if the government wins, is it just going to be about iPhones? But in a way, it doesn't, and it sounds like the answer is no, it's going to be about any piece of technology. And in a way, it doesn't matter what that answer would have been because of the convergence of phones and tablets and computers and all, technology kind of becoming the same thing over time. So any sort of legal distinction would be moot eventually. But our special guest in studio is, in case you have been completely blind to our Twitter or Facebook feed, is Lynn Ulbricht, the mother of Ross Ulbricht. And of course, Ross was the alleged Dread Pirate Roberts who was railroaded by the government and is currently, sadly, being kidnapped by the government, but there is an appeals case going forward.
Being held hostage by criminals in costumes.
Exactly. Really ridiculous blue costumes. But we're going to switch gears momentarily and talk to her about some of the recent stuff with that. And then we're going to see the ways in which Ladar and Lynn think that the two cases converge, which I think is really important. I think there is a lot of overlap there. But before we get to that, Lynn, I was just mentioning this at the outset of the show. There is a new fundraiser going on. And just for those who didn't catch you the last time you were on, tell our listeners about that.
Sure. I just want to say, Ladar's the honey bear. I'm the mama bear.
Careful there. You may take the... No, I'm just kidding.
I'm a very angry mama bear.
Yeah, you are. And for good reason. Both of you for good reason.
Yeah. Yes. Well, we're constantly having to raise money to fight the government because, of course, they are very rich. And they're very powerful and relentless, and it's almost impossible for...
You don't have your own money printer?
No, I've been working on it. No. Only kidding. So we're always... And so we have this fundraiser that was inspired by Ross. Actually, he had a dream about it, and because he knows we're always looking for money. And it's based on his art. He did a sketch in prison of his view of the trial. It's called The Trial I Saw. And it's... being slowly revealed by people clicking on a grid for $1 a square, and all of that money goes to fund Ross's appeal. And it's becoming somewhat revealed, not totally. And now I'm saying, hey, can you ID some of these characters in here, and encouraging people to keep playing, especially because Roberts and Roberts has scattered throughout 21 grams of gold. So there's still grams of gold, from what I understand, that can be won by the lucky person.
Oh, you're kidding. So if you uncover the right pixel, you'll get a gram of gold.
Yes.
That's pretty neat.
Pretty cool. It's like a treasure hunt. So, and it all helps Ross, and it's a lot of fun, and I like it better because I'm not begging people. Let's say come play and let's have some fun too. So that's going on. And we also just want to encourage people, if a tax deductible donation is important, that we encourage people to give to the blackcross.org.
AmericanBlackCross.org.
Yeah. Well, I think the actual URL might be, I don't know. Anyway, It's one of those things. And that's helping American political prisoners like Ross. And and it is tax deductible.
Well, I wasn't even aware of this organization.
Well,
again, ignorance there.
The money we raised in Acapulco, which it was $748 after we paid for the shirts. And that money went through American Black Cross. So.
By the way, the shirts were donated at cost by Brave New Books. Thank you, Brave New Books. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well,
and Texas Bitcoin Conference donated some more today for the Libertarian Convention so we can sell. So I got much more for shirts.
I'll be speaking.
Awesome.
I'll be speaking there, and you're going to be there. And
and when is that and where is that? I don't even know.
April 8th in San Antonio.
Oh, okay. So are we going, I guess?
Sure.
Danny was going to go without me. I see how it is.
You weren't supposed to tell him.
Sorry.
Lynn. Well, and how far have you gotten on the trial I saw? Do you know how much has been uncovered thus far?
Yeah, about half of it.
Really?
There's plenty more. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there is plenty more, half more to be exact.
Yeah, half more.
But I mean, that's still pretty impressive. And that's not a bad chunk of change there for the appeals
Very
fund.
helpful. Yeah. Of course, the bills are enormous, but it is definitely helpful, very helpful. And we announced it at Liberty Forum in New Hampshire, and on Free Talk Live, and Derek Slopey, who was the mastermind technician programmer behind this, because it's quite complex, happened to be there, and so he talked about it, and people immediately started playing, and
awesome.
And it was really great. Yeah,
I think what really got it going was when you brought it up on the Crypto Show.
Oh yeah, no, that was definitely
our subsequent mentions of it. I mean, that probably accounted for about 90% of the
probably
the fundraising you've had thus far.
Well, apparently, if you have a new coin, you're lucky if you come on our show, because it seems like all of the coins that have come on lately have just exploded after they were on here.
Oh, that's true. Like we talked about with John Ferguson. So
Made Safe, Factum.
If you're listening and you have a cryptocurrency, come on the Crypto Show, and we'll make you rich. No, I'm just kidding. Well, that's really neat, and I think it's really beautiful that a real piece of Ross is there for people to check out. And it's almost kind of a metaphor for the whole trial. It's like we're slowly uncovering, all the evidence, all the wrongdoings by the government. The public is slowly, to the extent that they care at all, and luckily more and more people do, becoming aware of just the details of this case and the implications for society going forward. Not to mention all the, related to that, the precedent set, the legal precedent set by this case. Mm-hmm. And so I guess let's get into that.
One more thing.
I want to say one more thing.
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
It's just that we're auctioning the original. So there is an auction once it's revealed for the original drawing.
That's awesome.
And there's a letter writing push because his birthday is on the 27th of this month.
Which is Easter. So we're hoping for resurrection in lots of ways, right?
Yeah, and also fitting.
32 years old, spending his early 30s in a cage, wonderful person.
Well, that means he's only a year away from getting out then. Like Jesus was resurrected at 33.
Like it.
Ross will be too. This is great. This is so fitting. And just real quick, so it's only once the contest is over.
Well, the picture is revealed. And then we'll also have posters for sale. So.
And then this will all be it's a totally different look. So excellent. Yeah, real snazzy. Check that out, freeross.org. Mm-hmm. Well, let's switch gears, and I want to kind of bring our guests into convergence here. Ladar Levison and Lynn Ulbricht, mother of Ross Ulbricht. And basically, as we've discussed before on the show, the government did various things to get pieces of evidence or to spy or surveil and to basically, railroad Ross. And I'm curious what some of those highlights would be that you and Ladar could talk about, and any similarities there might be between LavaBit, Apple, and then, of course, the Ross's trial.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I'm sure Ladar can explain it technically a whole lot better than I can. Some of the subjects in the appeal, some of the things that they talk about is, first of all, the seizure of Ross's laptop and social media accounts was basically what's called a general warrant, which the Fourth Amendment requires particularity. It requires that you say, I'm after this particular thing. And if they don't, they want something else, they have to go back and get another warrant for that thing.
They sometimes even have to specify where in the room it is.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think. Mm-hmm. And so that's...
Yeah, well, you can't find a 55-gallon drum inside of a thimble.
Yeah,
and you can't go on a fishing expedition rummaging through somebody's house to see what you can find. And if in this case, if it had been a physical file cabinet, it would be clearly unconstitutional. But what they're saying in this case, and what the precedent will be, is that because it's on a laptop, it's digital and it's not protected. And so this is a very, very important point going forward into the digital age, because obviously a laptop is a file cabinet on steroids.
Well,
it is a gateway to all kinds of personal information.
And it's going to replace physical filing cabinets.
Of course,
eventually.
It already has, really, in a lot of ways, right? We all know that and phones, which are basically computers.
Well, what's silly is, real quick, the hard drives are physical too. Like they're stored on physical places in the hard drive. So it's kind of like, why? Yeah. How are they then not using the same old restrictions?
I guess because the Fourth Amendment says papers. And it wasn't written on paper. I don't know. I don't know how you can possibly justify it.
They'll find any way to justify anything, yeah.
I do know, going back to a secret DOJ memo that came out as a result of the Snowden disclosures, that the way they justify a lot of the bulk surveillance programs is they said the computer inside the home was subject to Fourth Amendment protection, but as soon as that electronic communication went over the wire out onto the internet, that there was no longer a reasonable expectation of privacy. And that because there was no reasonable expectation of privacy, there was no Fourth Amendment protection. Now, I don't know about the specific circumstances of the warrant in Ross's case, but it could be that because they took the computer at the public library instead of inside of a home, that he was in a public place and they're probably arguing that he had no expectation of privacy. I don't know. They can come up with all sorts of creative legal theories given enough time and money.
Yeah, well, actually, this is addressed in the appeal, and it's saying, well, it's ridiculous to say you don't have an expectation of privacy for your own laptop. I mean, another issue was the use of pen traps and pen registers, and I don't know that much about that, but I know it's a surveillance. It was warrantless, and they used it for surveillance in a physical location, and the appeal is saying that isn't legal. You probably know more about that than I do, Ladar.
Pen register trap and
pen
trace
register, yeah.
Back in the 1960s and 70s, when law enforcement would attach a device to a telephone line, and it would literally pick up the electronic signals going over the line as you dialed the rotary dial. And the register would look something like a seismograph. And it would have a little needle on a slowly rotating piece of paper. And the needle would bounce up and down in relation to the particular pulse that it saw go across the line. That was called a pen register. A trap and trace was a device that they would install at the central office, which would trap incoming calls and trace their origin. And basically what you can think of in modern terms is a pen register trap and trace is a device used to collect metadata.
Hold that thought. We're coming to break with Ladar Levison and Lynn Ulbricht. Fascinating stuff. Stay tuned for more.
Now.
This is the Logos Radio Network.
For the longest time. For the longest. If you said that Bitcoin was my line, I would tell you.
Show enough. Show you right.
What else can I do? I'm so inspired by you, and I'm just holding for the longest time. Once I knew my stocks and bonds were gone, I knew Satoshi Nakamoto was the one to come and save me. Encrypted money, and I'm just holding for the longest time. Hold for the longest time. Hold for the longest time.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Crypto Show here on this lovely Sunday, March 13th, 2016. A Sunday here on Logos Radio Network, brought to you as always by Brave New Books, Hill Country Home Improvements, and don't forget one of the best causes of the year, if not the century, freeross.org. You can go there to check out the trial I saw, Ross's drawing depiction of the trial, and you can unveil piece by piece and even win some gold by doing so.
And while you're on the topic, Ladar, are you still taking investments in Darkmail?
Yes, it's darkmail.info. We've actually kind of run out of money at the moment. I'm in loose discussions with venture capitalists, so hopefully those pan out, and they'll provide the funds that I need to relaunch LoveAbit. But if that doesn't work, I may have to stop working on it unless we get a surge in donations. But there's still a donate link on darkmail.info if anybody wants to help out. And if you hit my Facebook page and scroll back a couple of years, you can find a Bitcoin address to donate with as well.
Excellent. Check that out, guys. Ladar is one of the, guys on the front line fighting the government attacks on privacy, not just legally, but technologically. And so the more that technology like his can be brought to the market, the better off we're all going to be.
With maybe another little venture coming forth pretty soon that might be protecting privacy, but we can't talk about it right now.
That's true. And someone else might be involved too, but we can't talk about that right now, but we hope to in the near future. Well, Ladar...
I thought you guys weren't allowed to talk about that.
What's that?
It's what I'm thinking of. I thought you weren't even allowed to say that much, but that's okay.
Well, I might have.
We didn't give away that.
Or not. I don't know. I was just. I was talking about your dog on your Twitter page.
Sure.
But Ladar, not to get too sidetracked, but I do like what you were saying off air, which is, in response to what Danny was saying. Well, you can just go to Europe and get a smartphone and not be tracked or whatever. But real quick, give your response to that about how that's not really a solution.
So, I learned a lot back in 2013 that I wanted to share, but for various reasons I couldn't. But I still tried to warn people the best I could. And I really foreshadowed what's happening in the Apple case, some of the issues that we're now talking about with Ross Ulbricht's case and more that we haven't even gotten into yet. But this sort of general attitude by law enforcement that they're entitled to everybody's private data. They don't like the use of encryption. They feel they're entitled to get around it. They want to be looking at everybody all the time because they feel like it's their mission to prevent crimes from happening before they actually occur. Sort of goes back to the whole Minority Report. We have the FBI pre-crime division. And we're already sort of seeing situations where people post something anti-government on Facebook who are foreign resident aliens, like on a student visa, and a week later the FBI shows up at their door and deports them. We're seeing situations where anti-government comments on social media are leading to arrests and prosecutions. So you have to be very careful about what you say and keep things hypothetical. And it's just sort of dangerous and has a very chilling effect on speech. If we can't express our opinions publicly, how can we expect to have a free and fair democracy? But I said...
Can I just interject something really fast? Yeah. Is that in the sentencing, the judge used the anti-government philosophy of the Silk Road and writings by DPR to justify her double life sentence. And that tells me it's a political agenda, very threatening to the government. But this is a big, anti-government comment, sending someone to prison.
So
for
there's
life.
A huge example. Forget being deported. They threw somebody in a cage for life for, allegedly expressing anti-government sentiments, which, regardless of whether or not that's the truth, we're supposed to be protected under the First Amendment for that.
Yeah, she specifically said she found those comments troubling and very dangerous. And the thing is, it came to me because the biggest drug dealer on Silk Road got 10 years. So it became very obvious, and the biggest cocaine and heroin dealer got 5. And it became very obvious to me that this was not about drugs, that it was about the threat of privacy, Tor, Bitcoin, and the political philosophy. So
if it were really about drugs, Ross would have gotten a commensurate sentence or less to those other guys.
Exactly.
And that clearly didn't happen. It's just it's a travesty.
And a danger to all of us.
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
We have a very strong tradition in this country of delineating different types of speech. And of course, the courts like to carve out certain types of speech that they say are protected, types that aren't. And political speech is the form of speech that has been sacrosanct for the entire history of our union. But that category of political speech is getting narrower and narrower. If you advocate on behalf of a terrorist organization, you think what they're doing in response to the government's actions is justified, that could be viewed as no longer being political speech, but as encouraging people to acts of violence. So, they're really making that category of what you could say and what you can't say that much smaller. And it becomes particularly important when you're talking about third-party providers like myself with LavaBit, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, Facebook, the list goes on, because they're being conscripted into service of the government and they're not allowed to talk about what they're being forced to do, which is very dangerous. When you have a situation where law enforcement goes after people who are speaking in ways that challenge governmental authority, and they're conscripting private citizens to do it, and keeping those infringements upon people's rights a secret, it's impossible for the public to exercise their civic responsibility and provide oversight. And just going back to what I was going to say a minute ago, I've tried.
Real quick, sorry, Lynn had a comment to make. Real quick, sorry.
Yeah, real quick comment there is that after the sentencing, you probably may know that Reason.com commenters, 3 of them, spoke against the judge, and the Southern District of New York issued a grand jury subpoena to Reason to turn over their names and presumably to go after them, and issued a gag order on Reason to talk about it. So that's exactly what you're talking about.
Also, real quick, they basically stifled free speech by preventing FIJA, the jury nullification group, from passing out flyers and informing people outside the courtroom of the right to jury nullification. So another example.
But they didn't stop those signs that I proudly gave money to.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
Well, what happened was the judge threatened that if they weren't gone, she would sequester the jury, which would prejudice them against Ross, because that's usually reserved for dangerous mafia types. Yeah. And so, she didn't say it was because of pamphlets.
Right, but close. But effectively, that's what she was doing.
They weren't able to get the signs down off of the phone booth, though, were they?
No. That's as far as I know, they stayed up there. Luckily, so.
That's Yeah,
I put $30 in on that. So.
But it is amazing how the government, with cases like Ross's or Ladar's or Apple's, it's not usually just one right they trample on. It's like multiple. They'll trample on also other rights just to get to the main right that they're going after. They'll trample on free speech, to go after your right to privacy, as an example.
Next, it'll be the Facebook post that Ladar was talking about, whoever that immigrant was. Everybody who likes it might get deported as well.
Or transferred intent issues, too, where it's like if Ladar's email service has somebody saying anti-government stuff. Are they going to go after Ladar or Darkmail because he happened to host someone who did that? Just like with
a huge issue in the Silk Road. Yeah,
absolutely.
We're sliding down a very slippery slope, and
that's right.
What I keep trying to point to is what I wrote on August 8, 2013, where I said this experience has taught me one very important lesson. Without congressional action or strong judicial precedent, I would strongly recommend anyone trusting their private data to a company with physical ties to the United States. And what that all points to is the fact that you can no longer trust third parties, companies with physical ties to the U.S.
We're coming to break, Ladar. Sorry to cut you off, but let's resume that thought on the other side of the break in just a moment. Here in the Crypto Show, Ladar Levison and Lynn Ulbricht.
There's a spooky new search engine on the internet, and you've probably already been caught in its web. You'd be amazed what it knows and how it gets its information. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and I'll tell you more in just a moment.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This public service announcement is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Spokeo.com boasts that it's not your grandma's white pages. How true. Spokeo is a creepy website that specializes in digging up personal information about people and their families. It goes beyond public source information like tax records and delves into the deep internet to dig up gems like the names of your children, your age, your home value, your income, hobbies, and even photographs. Then it posts all this information on its website, making it available to every Tom, Dick, and Harry without your knowledge or consent. I highly recommend searching for your own name at Spokeo.com and following the procedure for removing your listing. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
Chemtrails.
Looking for some truth? You found it. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
I've been walking a tightrope between fact and fiction. Been wrestling with demons in small bottle prisons. Been talking to sinners who claim to be Christian, but shouting at leaders who claim to be listening. And the pendulum swings from the left to the right. Its momentum increases the need for the fight, like a moment of blindness and a lifetime of...
Welcome back to the Crypto Show, guys. Our final two segments here on this lovely Sunday, March 13th, 2016. Here on Logos Radio Network, brought to you, as always, by Brave New Books and Hill Country Home Improvements. And speaking real quick at Brave New Books, I'm sniffing on some Peppermint doTERRA essential oils available here at Brave New Books, giving me a little mental boost while I try to finish out the show.
Snake oil.
Well, oil, just not snake oil. Okay. Snake oil is for other purposes. So you can always get that at Brave New Books, or a Rebound energy drink, which I also drink, which is keeping me alive and well during the show. But anyway, we're talking with our guests, Ladar Levison and Lynn Ulbricht, and we're going to switch gears momentarily back to some of the issues with the Ross case. But before we do that, Ladar got cut off in what he was saying before the break. And Ladar, go ahead and start that from the beginning, and we've got a full segment, so no commercials will interrupt you.
Well, what I was saying is I knew a lot more in 2013 than I was allowed to talk directly about. Just like now, I still know a lot more that I'm allowed to talk directly about. But if you interact with people behind the scenes, you peek behind the curtain, you start to get a feel for where things are headed. So it doesn't surprise me that we're seeing the Apple case. It doesn't surprise me that we saw that FISC warrant, which I quoted on Twitter. It doesn't surprise me what has happened in some of the rulings in the Ross Ulbricht case. And what I wrote in 2013 seems particularly prescient today. This experience has taught me one very important lesson. Without congressional action or a strong judicial precedent, I would strongly recommend against anyone trusting their private data to a company with physical ties to the United States. And what that really means is if a company has physical ties to the United States and has any information or encryption keys that could potentially, not even necessarily guarantee, but simply facilitate potential surveillance against a target, and that company or person has physical ties to the United States, they could be compelled to surrender or use that information in order to facilitate that surveillance in precisely the same way that Apple is being compelled today. We tried to foreshadow this in our appellate brief. I spoke about this a little bit in an Ars Technica write-up. It's really sort of a dangerous trend, and I think the only thing that will have any chance of stopping it is if we really change the attitude about surveillance. And I think the only way we can do that is by passing a law which mandates that every surveillance order becomes public after a certain fixed period of time, regardless of where the investigation is at.
50 years.
30 years is the default classification period. But the way it works now is when a third party receives one of these orders, they're placed under gag, and they have to go back and ask the court for permission to talk about it later. And the court can continually deny that permission indefinitely. And to me, that is just simply wrong. I mean, there needs to be a fixed period, whether it's a year, 2 years, 6 months. I don't know if I'm particularly qualified to pick a particular time frame. I definitely don't think it should be 30 years, but I think it should be probably 1 year or maybe even shorter. And the simple justification that I used is that if they place somebody under surveillance for a year and they haven't charged that person with a crime and arrested them during that period, they're probably not going to. And they're no longer necessarily giving away they no longer have a compelling reason to keep the investigation a secret, other than the fact that it may be a fishing expedition or something of that nature. And the reason this particular idea is so important to me is millions of people, and probably most of them foreigners, but probably at least hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of Americans, have been placed under surveillance at some point and don't even know it. We don't even realize that we've become victims of this sort of surveillance apparatus because we have no way of finding out that we were placed under surveillance unless the particular third party in question fights for the right to tell us. And that has happened a few times. There's a very famous example a couple of years back in 2014, I believe, when some former employees of WikiLeaks were notified by Google that they had received a request for their data from the government. But we wanted to move on and talk about the server in the Silk Road case.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And just one last comment on my part. Not that I really believe the government should, personally, that I believe the government should be surveilling us. I think it's, terrorism's the excuse, but it's a lame one and a false one. But regardless, like you were saying, the period of, between the surveillance and the disclosure should be minimal. And you can compare it to the recent Supreme Court case where they ruled that when you get pulled over in a traffic stop, they basically can't detain you beyond the purposes of the traffic stop unless they have additional valid reason for doing so, some sort of probable cause. And so that, to me, is a similar thing here where, unless they can come up with a compelling reason based on evidence to do it longer, something like a year seems appropriate.
We talked earlier about how the Supreme Court has carved out different categories of speech which are not protected by the First Amendment. And what they basically have said is that there are certain situations where the government has a compelling interest in restricting speech. And the reason they cite is the government's interest in conducting investigations in secret such that the subject of the investigation can't tamper with the evidence, alter his methods, or flee prosecution, which is a legitimate reason. But you have to also admit that you have to balance that against the need for public access and use the scale of time in order to balance those two competing interests. And that at some point, the scale tips and public access becomes more important than the potential for harming the investigation. And the problem is that because of the way the laws are written and the way they're employed by the courts, you end up with these indefinite gags in which the third party has to go back and ask for permission to lift it, to sort of fight that battle along that scale. And to me, that's the inherent problem. In some countries, when you're placed under surveillance, I believe this is the case in Switzerland, but don't quote me on that, after a certain period of time, the company is actually legally required to let you know that they had to turn over your data to a third party. And it seems to make sense. Even if they're not charged, they should know that they were placed under surveillance so that they can preserve that information themselves and, if necessary, start accumulating the resources for a full and fair defense.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, let's switch gears as mentioned, and let's get to, we got 2 minutes till the break, but we still have another segment as well.
It also kind of sounds like he's describing the U.S. as a great firewall. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe China doesn't have it so bad.
I know. I like that. That's the sad part is like when compared to the rest of the world, we are just so ridiculously unfree, but that's the way it is. I want to talk about how in Ross's case, basically, and with the server, we're referring to how the government basically infiltrated the admin logins, right? And were masquerading.
So the big question in the Silk Road case is how did they de-anonymize Ross Ulbricht as the Dread Private Roberts and the operator of the Silk Road? And we know that they managed to get malware onto the Silk Road servers, but there was a very important precedent set where the judge said the FBI didn't have to disclose how they did that. And because they didn't have to disclose how they did that, we have no idea how all this information that is at the heart of the Silk Road case was collected and sort of created. And
we don't know if it was legally. We don't even know if it was legally obtained or if it's admissible in court. Because for all we know, the methods they
is that it was legal despite not knowing the methods. And I can tell you what her thinking was when we come back.
Yeah, well, I would definitely like to know the thinking on that, and definitely want Lynn to maybe flesh out some of the other details of the case that are relevant to the infiltration of the server and other related matters. But to me, I just can't fathom logically, and I'm sure they have some legal BS to justify it, how if we don't know how it was obtained, how can they just assume it was legally admissible and obtained in a legal manner? It's just crazy to me. But we got 10 seconds left. So we'll be back on the other side with Lynn Ulbricht and Ladar Levison. Stay tuned. We got one more exciting segment left.
Easy.
All right, guys, welcome back to the final segment. It's so sad that all good things must come to an end, but it's been an exciting show. And guess what? There's still 12 minutes left, and we can pack a lot in. So I'll try to talk less, but we have our guests, Ladar Levison and Lynn Ulbricht. We're talking about the Apple case that Ladar's involved in, and, of course, the Ross Ulbricht case that Lynn's son was involved in, and all the overlaps. Lynn, you had something kind of cool to say as we were coming out. It would have been better spontaneously.
Yeah. Well, talking about how we don't know how they found the server, Edward Snowden said publicly or to Liberty Forum 2 weeks ago that it's unthinkable that the NSA was not involved. I mean, he's just like, of course they were. And, of course, that's illegal. And they have their parallel construction, which is Agent Christopher Tarbell coming forward with his explanation of how he supposedly found the server. And by the way, he was never called to trial. It's like he didn't exist, so he couldn't be cross-examined. He disappeared. And
Didn't one of the people involved get arrested?
Uh-huh.
Oh, a couple of them did, actually.
One of the FBI agents that was involved early.
Oh, well, the corrupt agents were, but I don't know that they had to do with the server. But in any case, just real quick, Tarbell came out with his explanation under oath, and immediately, worldwide, experts said it's gibberish, it's impossible, it's a lie, basically.
You mean his explanation of how he obtained? His
explanation. And he goes, well, the thing is, I can't prove it because, darn it, I didn't save my work. I didn't click... I clicked don't save.
The dog ate it.
And yeah, like Ross said, the dog ate my evidence. And it's like, pathetic. And yet he goes, just trust us. And I'm like, this is under oath. And that a judge would accept this and this could happen is very frightening.
I can't believe that they would allow that. I mean, that's
one of many, many things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and Ladar, so speaking of which, as we were going out talking about the same thing, they, as we were just mentioning, the judge would not allow the court to talk about or to know about how access to the server was had. What was the justification for that?
Ross Ulbricht's team moved for an evidentiary hearing to discover the origin of all the evidence against him. And the judge had to rule whether or not to grant that particular request, whether or not the defense team could investigate the origin of the evidence. Because as Lynn hinted at, there was some hinky stuff going on. What the judge said was that because Ross did not claim ownership over the servers, he had no Fourth Amendment right to its privacy, and because his Fourth Amendment right was not violated, there was no need to have an evidentiary hearing. Now, the reason this is significant is because if the defense can prove that evidence was obtained illegally, all of the evidence against him would be considered fruit from the poisonous tree and would be thrown out, and the government would no longer have a case. And what the judge basically said was, you have to admit ownership. In other words, admit guilt, admit ownership of the evidence against you, and then you can ask for this hearing. It's kind of a catch-22.
Yeah, I was just going to say catch-22.
Dangerous precedent. I like to think the Department of Justice, they have over 110,000 employees with an annual budget of just over $27 billion. And they're using that particular budget to, quote, plunder our nation's law libraries, looking for incremental infringements of our rights, which may have seemed minor at the time. And then they're assembling those minor infringements into a slippery slide so they might reach the bottom of a dangerous slope. And I think the Apple case is a perfect example of that. It's one of these big pieces in that slippery slide, which will get them back to a world in which they can break into anybody's device using any means necessary. And what was particularly disturbing is so one of the issues at play in the Apple case that we never got to, bunch of things we never got to, like alternative means for breaking in without Apple's help. So I'll just throw out there, I know for a fact that the NSA was involved in my case, but what they did is they coordinated with the FBI agents and basically told the FBI what they needed to do. I don't know if the same thing.
So another parallel reconstruction thing, yeah.
Well, it's not necessarily parallel reconstruction if the FBI agent is the person performing it, but they've got a NSA mentor who is explaining how to perform the particular investigatory technique.
Well, it's fuzzy either way, yeah.
Ant catalog that came out, I think, in 2013. That was a situation where it had a bunch of methods and mechanisms, tools that had been developed by the NSA, which were now available for the FBI to use in particular surveillance cases. And it could be one of those methods or mechanisms, one of those pieces of malware or zero-day exploits, so to speak, that was being used in the Ross Ulbricht case. But of course, because of the judge's ruling, we will never know.
Real quick, Lynn.
And one of the things, the defense did come forward in a motion and bring up the NSA, and the government just scoffed. And they said, oh, boogeyman, you're bringing up a boogeyman. But they never said it wasn't the NSA. They never actually said and never did that. But they have this sort of snide way of belittling and mocking their opponent that I find very unprofessional. But that's what they did in this case.
In the Apple case, the Department of Justice wrote in one of their briefs that they have no legal obligation nor any desire to consult other federal agencies on methods for accessing the iPhone. That they believe the proper method is to go directly to Apple using the Ulbricht Act. So nice tweaky sort of or pithy sort of comment in their brief that, they just sort of make up the rules as they go.
Right, exactly. Well, Preet Bharara himself said our laws are expansive and adaptable, especially when it comes to the internet. This is in writing in one of the documents in the Silk Road case. And that's scary. That is totally opposed to the Fifth Amendment, which says specificity is required in law. A prosecutor doesn't just get to expand law, but that's what they're doing.
That's what dictators do. Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway,
I thought prosecutors were the hands of God. Maybe
really.
Well, they think
they
that,
do take an oath.
Sure.
I think the prosecutor who told me that.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, really?
Well, that's one of the few truths you'll get out of a prosecutor, I'm sure.
If you think about it, the Director of National Intelligence just put in his annual request to Congress for a budget of $52 billion. If they can't protect our country with $52 billion, I think I want my money back because we're not getting
well, that's the tendency of government. Real quick, the tendency of government is the more they fail, the more money they ask for, the more money they get. The private sector, you fail, they take money away from you. That's the big difference between the private and public sector. Anyway.
And it's particularly vicious when it comes to national security. The bigger the failure, the bigger the raise in their budget.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess briefly, in the Apple case, some of the three methods that could be used to sort of bypass this encryption is there are silicon testing devices which use, I believe, lasers or X-rays, and they can actually modify a chip after it's been manufactured. And people have pointed out that they could extract this secret piece of information from this ASIC processor using this particular device. Of course, it's risky. It doesn't always work. And usually these chips, once they've been modified, only operate for about 20 to 30 minutes after they've been exposed to this particular process. But that is certainly one method. Of course, it would be time-consuming and expensive, which to me doesn't seem like a bad thing. I mean, I really believe that surveillance should be time-consuming and expensive because that provides sort of a guarantee that it isn't abused.
Right. And we have 3 minutes left, by the way, Ladar. Just want to give you a heads up, 3 minutes. So just go ahead and wrap up what you want to wrap up with.
They could use would be waiting for an iOS vulnerability to be discovered in the version of the operating system that's on there, which would be the waiting game. Or they boot up the phone and they sit there and they see what applications are going out over the internet and pulling data in and just look for one that's insecure or speaking to a provider that is willing to cooperate and then inject the malware into that data stream and get their so-called foothold into the device. And that's just assuming that the NSA doesn't have a 0 day that they can't exploit as well. So there are alternative means than sort of going down this slippery slope, as I like to call it. Now, what I found particularly disturbing is one of the primary arguments in this case from a constitutional perspective is, can you compel Apple? Because based on the crypto wars in the 1990s, generally believe that source code is considered speech and is therefore protected by the First Amendment. So can you compel Apple to modify their source code as a form of compelled speech? And in response to that, on Thursday, the government supplied their reply brief. And in discussing that particular argument, they cited the Lovabit case in a footnote and said, well, the reason we asked Apple to do it is because we thought that would be the more amenable solution. But if they would prefer, we could demand they turn over the keys and the source code directly, and the FBI pulls this off. And they cited my case as a reason for that. And, I just found it particularly disturbing that the government would use the Lovabit case as a precedent. And it goes back to what I said earlier about plundering the nation's law libraries for small infringements in order to build upon them and erode our rights over time. And it really rubbed salt in an old wound that was left festering by the appellate court, because they dismissed my appeal on a contrived procedural technicality and took great pains to avoid talking about the substantive issue. It's one of the inherent problems with our justice system. And for the government to rely upon this particular case, where a small business was forced to mount an adversarial defense in a secret proceeding with only a week to prepare, 1,500 miles from home, and without, it's just ridiculous. And
well, the deck is stacked against you is what it is, and that's what they did to you, Ladar. Ladar, we want to have you back soon to talk about the Apple case and more. Sorry we didn't cover quite everything we wanted to. Appreciate you being on.
I was going to throw out there the next big date is March 22nd, when the judge will hear oral arguments. So let's get together afterwards and talk about what we hear.
Sounds great. Can't wait to have Ladar back on. It's always fun. Lynn Ulbricht, 14 seconds left. Final thought?
Yeah, well, I think the word slippery slope or precedent, which is basically what we're talking about, is the real issue here. And